Hello everyone and welcome to All the Things. Guess who watched one too many epoxy table videos on YouTube? So a while back we moved into a new house, and when I say new house I actually mean a very old house, but that's beside the point. And between my wife and I think we owned pretty much a chair that we got from our parents. Other than that, no furniture whatsoever. And so we had to sort of systematically start getting some, cupboards and stuff to put all of our stuff in. But we still haven't gotten to getting an actual dining room table. We did go shopping for dining room tables, but as it turned out, they are actually quite expensive. And then it's not the highest quality wood. You have to sort of compromise on sizing and all of that, and you end up with something that's not exactly special, something that a lot of other people have. So yeah, I just thought to myself, if I can get hold of a slab, surely I can make my own dining room table. That way you can find one that's the correct dimensions, or cut it to the exact size you want, design a base, and all of that. So yeah, that's what we did. As it turns out, I know a guy who knows a guy who actually has a wood wholesaling business. So I had to go and pay him a visit, and they had these wonderful wood slabs. The specific wood, it's called sepia wood. It's a type of African mahogany, and this specific slab is from the crotch of a tree. So it's sort of where the tree splits like this, and what that means is you get some incredible figuring right around, I guess, where the V of the tree would have been, and it's just really beautiful. Upon seeing this piece of wood, I immediately realized that it's pretty much exactly the right size for what we want, and it's going to fit into the corner where we want to put it nicely. And I also really like the fact that the slab is an irregular shape. I just feel it fits in with I don't know, with my personality, I guess, for me and my wife. And so as a result, we didn't actually cut the slab. I also really quite like the raw edges. So the fact that it looks like it's pretty much been chainsawed out of the tree. I have cleaned this up a bit, but I think the sort of rough look really looks pretty cool. It also still has a little bit of a live edge left on sort of the underside of the one corner, which is also pretty cool, and even more so on the other side actually. Obviously, with a slab of wood like this, there's always going to be some imperfections. So you can obviously see this corner where it's been chipped off, and then it is also cracked right about there, along with some other just little small imperfections. And now obviously this is where the interesting part comes in, which is of course going to be the epoxy. So funny enough, I don't actually like epoxy. I like the wood. I like how beautiful the wood is, and I don't want to do anything that sort of takes away from that. And epoxy feels like it's a bit artificial to me. Still, I am going with it for two reasons. The one is going to be practicality. So obviously there's this chip in the table, and if somebody were to put a glass down there, it's going to be askew and it's going to fall off and break, and it makes the table less practical, the little chip over there. And then the big one is the crack through here. So the thinking is, if somebody were to, I don't know, spill a glass of cool drink or something and the fluid goes in here, I won't be able to get it out. It might stain the wood, and I think just the epoxy will also probably keep the crack from spreading. So that's sort of the thinking behind it. And if it's a low enough amount of epoxy, it might just sort of accent how the wood looks, which might make it a bit more beautiful even. I guess we'll see. Before going near the table with any type of epoxy, you obviously need to seal the edges first. I don't know if there's a perfect solution for this. I just used regular duct tape, and you'll see later how that turned out. And with the edges all sealed, it was time to mix up some epoxy. We opted to go for a black epoxy to fill up the cracks, and it's important to note that if you go for a colored epoxy, Wood is sort of like a sponge. It's got a porous surface, and if left untreated, it will soak up any liquid. So what you'll see me doing right now is I'm just going over all of the cracks with a clear epoxy. That will provide a physical barrier between the wood and the colored epoxy to prevent the wood from staining. There we go. It's now a couple of days later, and the clear epoxy is nice and hard. So now we can go ahead and mix up some black epoxy and start filling the cracks. To color the epoxy, I'm using activated charcoal. This is a pigment rather than a dye, which will also help not to soak into and stain the wood. Okay, so it's all been going extremely well, and then we developed our first leak. As you can see right there, it's dripping on the floor from there, from there. So now I'm going to scramble to make a plan to get that sorted. Okay, hopefully the crisis is averted now. I just stuck a whole bunch of duct tape down there, and you can see the epoxy is pushing through the wood over there, but there's nothing we can do about that now. Build a table, they said. It will be fun, they said. So after that first leak, it was like someone opened a tap on the table, and all of the epoxy just started running out of the big crack. So it's been damage control ever since there. As you can see, some a nice amount of epoxy leaked on the floor, and I just sort of grabbed the closest thing I could find. I thought a sponge was sort of going to be the only thing that would apply sort of even pressure to an uneven surface. So for now, I'm just leaving it as is. Hopefully the epoxy will dry a bit, get a bit less runny, and then I can try topping it up again and see if it leaks. For now, it's sort of problem averted, but I'm just gonna leave it like that and finish up with all of the little small cracks in the table, and then try my hand at another pour of the big cracks. So fingers crossed that it goes a bit better next time. So I started filling the tiny cracks with epoxy. It's incredible how well the epoxy actually runs into the cracks, and it took quite some time to keep on filling it up as it soaked into the wood. After the drama with the leak on the other side of the table, I was a bit skeptical about this corner. Luckily, it didn't end up leaking. I did, however, overfill it ever so slightly, which caused some extra work for me with the sander afterwards, but it didn't turn out too badly, and I'm happy with the result. Okay, it is now the next day, and our first pour of black epoxy is starting to dry up nicely. I did also go ahead and touch up some of the really small cracks, just for what it's worth, just because I was already busy. And now it's time to try and fill up our leak again, which is going to be quite eventful. I am going to try and make a better plan in case it leaks again, and we'll see how it goes. It's going to be touch and go, fingers crossed. I really don't want to make another mess, and also I'm starting to run low on epoxy. I should still have enough left, but I don't want any unnecessary wastage. So yes, let's give it a go. And we have success. I'm very happy that there wasn't any leaks the second time around. The epoxy is also actually pretty much set. It's nice and hard. I'm not gonna start sanding the deeper pours quite yet. I'm just going to make sure they are properly set before I start sanding those. But as for the other side of the table, these tiny cracks have had, I think, more than enough time. and are ready to be sanded. So yeah, very excited to see how it looks. So let's get going. It was extremely satisfying sanding off the excess epoxy. I was starting to get a good idea of how the table is going to look like with the filled up cracks, and by now I've also changed my mind about the epoxy. I think it definitely accentuates the wood rather than clashing with it, and I was more excited than ever to see the finished result. Another couple of days went by, and by now the deeper pores were ready to start sanding. It's also quite a mission to sand the epoxy. It gets quite hot, so you can't focus on one single spot for too long. It also clogs up the disc quite badly, so I had to use a wire brush to clean the disc every so often. Sanding the crack was super satisfying. It's obviously a lot thinner than the other side, so the excess epoxy came off rather easy. I was also very excited to see what it would actually look like when the excess epoxy was off, and it did not disappoint. With the excess epoxy sanded off, it was time to go over the complete table with my rotary sander. This is just to make sure that the grain is even before continuing with the sanding process. In between sanding, it's also good to spray the top down with some water. This makes the grain stand up a little bit, and it makes it slightly easier to get a nice and smooth finish. It also accentuates the grains nicely, so it gives you a glimpse into what the finished product is going to look like. Now it was time to clean up the mess that I made with the epoxy leak on this corner. I spent quite a bit of time with the rotary sander getting into all the nooks and crannies, trying to retain the raw chainsaw look on this corner. All in all, I would say it actually turned out really nicely, and it might actually even be one of my favorite parts of the entire table. The other side also required some cleanup, though it went a lot quicker since it was already nice and flat to begin with. There's always going to be a couple of tiny bubbles that makes it through the epoxy as it sets. To fill these up, I just mixed up some clear epoxy, I cleaned the holes nicely and then filled it up, and it seems to have worked really nicely. There was still a couple of imperfections that I needed to deal with around the table. Now, for something like this, it would have obviously been ideal if I could have flipped the table onto its side and just filled the crack from the top. However, since I've been working on this table alone pretty much all the time and it weighs in excess of 120 kgs, that simply wasn't possible, and I had to make another plan. It was much of the same story on the other side, but it actually ended up working quite well, so I'm really happy with how it turned out. Now I just needed to sand off the tiny bit of excess epoxy from filling up the bubbles, and then it was time to move on to the next step. The end is in sight with the epoxy is looking good, the pores are looking good. The little bubbles that we filled up are gone now. So now it's time to finish sanding the table. This is going to take a lot of time. I'm going to be very, very careful and take my time with this to make sure that I get the finish as proper as I can. So I'm going to go over with my mouse sander over the entire table, checking with the studio light as I go along to make sure everything is as even as I can physically get it. And yeah, so let's get going. For the final bit of sanding, I was using my little mouse sander. Now, it's obviously a bit undergone for the job, and if I ever have to do it again, I'll probably invest in a nice and big random orbital sander. But it worked quite well, it just took me a bit longer than it otherwise would have. After sanding, I spent some time to thoroughly go over the table to make sure I'm happy with the finish before spraying some water on it for the final time. And that's it, I'm finally done sanding the table. Much as I'm chilled about the sort of odd shape of the table that I actually quite like, and the rough edges and all of that, I really want the top to be finished as properly as I can physically get it. So I was really diligent in properly sanding the top, not cutting any corners there. So hopefully it comes through on the camera, but you can see how nice and smooth the table is sanded all across. So yeah, so now I'm gonna have to wait for a couple of strong friends, and then we're gonna flip the table. Then I can actually put the finishing product on the bottom, and then give that a little while to dry, flip it over, finish the top, and then we have a dining room table. So some friends finally came over and helped me flip the table, and I just realized that I haven't actually showed the underside of the table on the video until this point. The slot that you see over there was actually cut out with a CNC machine, and that was done so that it fits nicely over the base that we had made and that it doesn't leave any metal exposed underneath. I still had some touch-ups to do around the edges of the table that I filled up earlier, but since the volume of epoxy was actually nice and small, it went rather quickly. The corner over here I was never quite happy with. I think the transition between the little cut off edge there and the live edge was a bit sharp, and I was never really happy with how it looked. So I just decided over here to just sand it a bit more flush with the live edge so that the transition corner isn't so sharp. And although it's still not perfect, I do think it looks a little bit better. I spent quite some time cleaning up the live edge on this table. As cool as the bark looks with the bit of color variation that it provides, it does compromise the table in terms of durability if you leave too much on there. I tried to find the best compromise between cleaning it up and still making it look like it's a live edge, and I think it turned out okay in the end. By now all of the prep work was done and we could finally finish the underside of the table. You can really see how the finishing product brings out the natural color of the wood as well as the grain, and I was getting more excited than ever to see what the actual finished top would look like. The journey from the garage into the living room was quite uneventful. The four of us quite literally had our hands full, but we managed to get the table into the house and onto its base without any damage. Let's go. It was now finally time for the moment of truth, so to speak, and we started applying the finishing product to the top of the table. The product we're using is called Rubio Monocoat. It's actually a hard wax oil finish for wooden floors, but it's very popular for use on slab tables like this. It really brings out the grain and the color of the wood, and it provides an excellent barrier of protection against the elements. The finished product turned out even better than we expected. It was also the right call to go for the black epoxy. It really accentuates the imperfections of the wood, and it also provides a really nice contrast against the rest of the slab. The 3D figuring on this specific slab is also something to behold. It almost needs to be seen to be appreciated, as the camera doesn't do it justice. I couldn't be more happy with how the project turned out. We are left with a spectacular piece of furniture that will remain the centerpiece of our household for many years to come. It might not look like it in a 20-minute YouTube video, but there's actually a lot of work that goes into making something like this. From transporting the slab to and from CNCing, to waiting for the epoxy to dry, each and every time you need to make a little touch-up, and then the sanding takes hours and hours and hours. Even so, I enjoyed this project so much so that if you like what you saw in this video and you are interested in something similar for your house, then I would really like to make a table for you. So I'm going to leave my email address in the video description down below. Please feel free to reach out so we can discuss. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.